This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to the November series of 1 month to a more effective compliance program series that I'm running in 2017. This month, we're going to take a look at 1 month of 360 degrees of communication in compliance. This month's sponsor is Dun & Bradstreet. The only thing that is constant right now in the regulatory environment is change. Supply chain leaders and compliance professionals alike continue to struggle with how to best adequately identify, screen, and gain visibility into ownership structures of third parties and or customers so that they understand exactly who they are doing business with. Companies can knowingly finance goods that are potentially obtained illegally or sold on the black market. Procurement teams that are unaware of third-party activities and have antiquated systems, they put their company at risk. Without proper visibility, these teams could unknowingly be funding terrorism or even engaging in human trafficking. In-depth research is needed to identify ultimate beneficial owners and third-party risks. No business ties to corrupt practices such as human trafficking or money laundering is going to self-report, so companies must take this work on themselves and obtain third-party data needed to determine risk, mitigate exposure, and protect their brand and comply with regulations. Dun & Bradstreet offers an end-to-end comprehensive solution to help organizations tackle this exact complexity. Leverage Dun & Bradstreet's complete due diligence reporting to know your vendor and your third-party partners. Do not expose yourself to undue risk. Contact Dun & Bradstreet today to learn more about vendor onboarding, supply risk management, and comprehensive compliance check. This month I'm going to tackle the concept of 360 degrees of communication and compliance. We're going to take a look at it from a variety of ways and mechanisms. We're going to consider the Chief Compliance Officer and his or her role in communications. We're going to take a look at how you can facilitate a two-way conversation of communications while sitting in the CCO suite. We're going to consider some of the leadership and other components of a CCO's role and how they will help you have a more robust and indeed holistic approach to compliance. We're going to consider the bottom-up approach to communications by utilizing communications techniques for your employees, third parties, contractors, and those that may come into contractual relationship with your company through the supply chain. We're going to consider 360 degrees of communications through operationalization of compliance and culture. It's going to be a very interesting month. I think as a CCO you will learn quite a bit, and at the end of the month you will not only have information which will allow you to be a more well-rounded CCO, but bring a much more holistic approach to your compliance function. My year-long series of 1 month to a more effective compliance program and the November edition of 1 month of 360 degrees of communication and compliance are a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Day 16, 360 degrees of communication through internal crowdsourcing. One of the greatest things about the compliance profession is that we are limited only by our collective imagination. If you can think it up, you can probably do it. This has led to not only continuing evolution of compliance programs, but continuing innovation in the compliance function. As compliance programs evolve and innovate, regulators take note, and the cycle becomes almost a continuous feedback loop. One technique new to compliance, but squarely within the 360-degree view of communication, is internal crowdsourcing, to enlist new ideas from employees to open new sources of innovation. This was explored in an article entitled Developing Innovative Solutions Through Internal Crowdsourcing, where the authors noted it allows employees to interact dynamically with coworkers in other locations, propose new ideas, and suggest new directions to management. Because many large corporations have pockets of expertise and knowledge literally scattered across the globe. This is an effective way for harnessing the cognitive diversity within an organization and can open up new rich sources for innovation. Internal crowdsourcing is a particularly effective way for companies to engage younger employees and employees working out on the front lines. In other words, operationalizing. There are 7 key elements companies should use in aid to moving forward in such an effort. Each of these apply forcefully to a chief compliance officer and compliance practitioner. Number 1, keep the focus on innovation. You should use this technique for long-term initiatives and not short-term improvements. Establish grounds for employee creativity with criteria including the ability to meet employees' unmet needs, delighting the employee, the solution's newness, marketability, commercial viability, and scalability. 2, give internal crowdsourcing participants slack time. If your company wants you focus solely and only on your day job, it will, by definition, limit your participation in company crowdsourcing projects to nights and weekends. This may not be when and where you do your best work. Companies must arrange to allow employees the time and space during working hours to participate meaningfully. 3, allow for anonymous participation. Trust is always a key issue in these types of projects. Anonymous participation can help build and maintain that trust because the organizational identities are revealed in an internal crowdsourcing project. Some individuals may feel compelled to defend their formal positions. Companies need to ensure participants feel safe about contributing knowledge, regardless of their seniority or risk in the company. 4, take steps to ensure that companies' experts don't exert their influence too heavily. Internal company experts will have their ideas given additional heft if their identities are known. This can have an unintended effect of intimidating others or lessening their voices in the process. Yet you must work to keep the process open to diverse perspectives for internal crowdsourcing to produce innovative outcomes. You should have the company's compliance experts operate as moderators and do what they can to encourage others to come up with compliance innovations. 5, use a collaborative process for internal crowdsourcing. Much like Chief Compliance Officer at Dun & Bradstreet Lewis Sapperman's use of social media to communicate with and obtain information from D&B's employee base, use of internal crowdsourcing project has the positive byproduct of engagement. It is also to build a system through which people within the organization share knowledge, learn from one another, and offer pertinent knowledge for use in new solutions. If you can engage your employees in compliance, you will not only have a better chance of keeping them engaged, but you will more fully burn compliance in the fabric of your organization by operationalizing compliance within your company. 6, design platforms that facilitate shared development and evolution of solutions. A key to internal crowdsourcing success draws inspiration from open source software. It is that employees need to see what other employees have contributed so that they can build upon it. You must find a way to share knowledge among the employee base on an ongoing basis. There are 3 major benefits to such an approach. Knowledge sharing among a crowd across a variety of knowledge types, not just ideas. The opportunity for co-evolution of solutions by the crowd. And finally, the degree to which feedback from the crowd helps to refine ideas. Finally, point number 7, be transparent about the plans for follow-up post-crowdsourcing. Not surprisingly, one major defect around internal crowdsourcing projects is the lack of follow-up and the lack of transparency for employee participants. Simply put, employees not only want to know the results, but they also want to know if their ideas are even used. This can be a powerful motivator for future participation or the opposite. Companies need to make the process open and fair. By internally outsourcing compliance function enhancements, a CCO can increase employee engagement in compliance. This is really completely symptomatic of a 360-degree view of communication and compliance. The entire process draws from your diverse employee base, which brings organizational learning and knowledge diffusion into the continuous improvement of your compliance program. just as the data in your organization is your data, so you should not only utilize it, but monetize it. Your employee base can be a large and untapped source of information that can be more readily be implemented and have a more rapid impact on your compliance program going forward. So what are today's 3 key takeaways? Number 1, always remember that in compliance, you are only limited on in using your imagination. If you can think of it, you can probably use it in the compliance function. Number 2, has been a constant theme throughout this month's series of podcasts, building trust and be transparent in your process. Employees want to know that their ideas are taken seriously and that their ideas are being used. If they're not being used, why are they not being used? How can they be improved upon? And number 3, through internally outsourcing compliance function enhancements, a CCO can increase employee engagement, but I think more importantly, you can actually more fully operationalize your compliance program because you have the benefit of having those on the front line who see how compliance could be more effective going forward. This is Tom Fox. Thank you for joining me on day 16, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow for day 17 of 1 month to 360 degrees of communication in compliance. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of 1 month to 360 days of communication and compliance. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only daily compliance podcast involving the nuts and bolts of compliance. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this month, Dun & Bradstreet. I hope you will join me tomorrow for another episode. The podcast series in November, 1 month to 360 degrees of communication, is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.